Hi everybody, I'm Tony E at Show IP Interface Brief, and it is my wrap-up show of day 59. Day 59 I did on Sunday. I did 2 labs. I did one troubleshooting lab, one configuration lab. And yesterday I took the day off. I did not grade my exams on Sunday night. I was tired, it was late. I took yesterday off, which was Monday. Today is Tuesday night. And I did grade my exam. I did only grade the configuration lab because I didn't finish 5 of the tickets on troubleshooting. So I actually think I'm just going to try that one again and try the latter half of the tickets, the remaining 5, and give them another go. Well, actually, not give them another go, but try them for the first time. And then I'll go ahead and grade that one. So I just go ahead and I pull up the answer key and I compare my notes and I look at the explanation, and that's how I grade myself. So these labs are the Cisco 360 workbook. This is CA number 2. It was really a lot of fun. CA number 1 and CA number 2 were a lot of fun. I think they are billed as the more introductory level preparation labs, certainly not very advanced. I did not feel like I was getting stumped on some super complicated things, but that doesn't mean that I aced it. I certainly did not ace it, but it was a lot of fun. Some of the things that I'm consistently scoring well on are DMVPN and BGP. I almost always immediately know exactly what they're asking, know how to configure it, know how to verify it, and I never hesitate for DMVPN and BGP. So I don't know why I sort of gravitate or have a better handle on those subjects more so than others, but yeah. So as I was, as I was reviewing the answer key, I was surprised at a few items that I got right, and I was definitely made aware of a couple of things that I got wrong. So the DMVPN section was A-OK, full credit for that. The switch configuration section, I did fairly well for the configuration. There was one thing, and I grade myself sort of the way that they suggest in the directions, which is if you miss a single bullet, you get 0 points for that subsection. So I try to grade myself to that standard. And I missed 1 bullet point on one of the things, which is only VLANs that need to carry traffic should be allowed on the trunks. And on that means they want you to do this switch port trunk allowed VLAN in the list of VLANs. And I did do that for all of the trunks except for the trunks between switch 1 and switch 2, where I actually allowed an additional 2 VLANs that weren't 100% necessary, but I allowed them. And that would have deducted points, so I gave myself a 0 for that. But everything else was fine. The switching was not very complicated. There wasn't any complex spanning tree. In fact, Ternal and rapid spanning tree, and that was about it. With the switch section, there was also an exposure to setting up DHCP, DHCP pool, DHCP scope, default router, everything. And that's something that I just don't do very often, but I was able to pull it through and do it correct. Again, that's not very complicated, but you know, there are just so many things that are active topics in the CCIE. And I know for myself, here's a view into myself, I tend to want to focus on the more complicated things, or study the more complicated things. I typically execute things I'm comfortable with, and what you're not supposed to do, you're supposed to step out of your comfort zone. And I try to do that often, but you know, you always kind of just fall back on what you know. And so DHCP is one of those things, right? It's not a super complex topic, and it's not something that I know very well. So I haven't done it nearly as often as I should, and I don't want to spend much time on it in the CCIE lab. You know, I want to just sail right through some of these easy sections. Another one which just had 2 bullet points, and from the bullet points themselves, you would think this is pretty easy. Assign IP addresses to router 1, 7, and 8, and make sure that all 3 routers can ping each other. This one was an integrated routing and bridging problem, and what that means is, let's see, I can do a whiteboard for this one. This is something that I was exposed to when I was doing when I sat at Narvic's boot camp. This is where you have a router, another router, and another router, and they are connected with 2 separate physical links. Now, typically what they teach you in all networking classes, especially at the CCNA level, is that this is a broadcast domain and this is a broadcast domain, and typically that means that these are 2 separate subnets. That means this would be 10.0.0.0/30, and that could be .1, and this could be .2, and this could be 10.1.1.0/30, and this could be .1 and .2 over here. That's not what this task was asking. What this task was asking, let me erase the blues off of here. What this task was asking was actually they wanted to do, I'm just going to throw a random subnet out there, 10.1.1.0/24, and they wanted this guy to be .1, this one to be .2, and this one to be .3. That's not the actual IP addresses, but that's what they wanted. So, you know, that with the very first time I saw this, I understood what it meant, but I didn't know that we could actually do this on the routers at the time. So again, this was something that I learned at Narvic's boot camp. It is in the CCIE official learning guide. What do they call this? The official certification guide. I did see a chapter or this topic covered, the IRB. Integrated routing and bridging. And what it essentially is on this particular one, this was a sub-interface, which was VLAN 10, and this was sub-interface 20. And so what you do is you actually create an internal bridge between the 2 interfaces, and off of that bridge you create an interface called a BVI, Bridge Virtual Interface, and you take the IP address and you put it on the BVI. So what that means is 2 can ping the .1, and 2 can also be bridged across to ping the .3, and vice versa. So it's a pretty cool little technology. You know, one of the challenging labs that I think I remember. Let's see if I'll just clear this off the screen and redraw it. That I remember is, again, the same sort of 3 router layout. Is you need this router to form a RIP adjacency, or not an adjacency. RIP doesn't form an adjacency. This router, let's call it router 3, router 2, router 1. Router 2 and 3 need to see each other's RIP updates. Router 1 cannot run RIP. And so how do you do that? Again, this would be a perfect solution for a BVI. You bridge these 2 interfaces on the inside. You bring up a BVI interface, and then now as RIP updates are sent out this link, they are bridged and brought onto the next link, and the next router gets them. This essentially acts like a switch, or more or less what it's actually called, a bridge. So that was one of the solutions that we needed for this lab, and it is something I hadn't done before. Well, it's something I haven't done outside of a lab. I've been exposed to it very few times. So it actually took me a while to solve that one. So what I want to do is actually I'm going to put that on my list of things to work on, which I should start a a document for that somehow. I'll write them on the whiteboard behind me, but in the meantime, I'll just do a document, integrated routing and bridging. I'm going to do configuration and validation. The IP addressing around there, I did okay. What else? The next section was OSPF. I was incorrectly configuring the priority values. You can configure priority under the routing process, but specifically it wanted the priority value to be assigned under the interface. And that's just my misunderstanding of where the priority needs to be configured and how it is affecting the routing domain. You know, there's another thing where you can actually assign priority values to neighbors using the neighbor statement. And so I need to, I'm going to write that down on this this notepad here. IRB. So let's do OSPF priorities. And we're going to do neighbor. We're going to do routing process and interface. What are the differences between the priority values set under those three options? Low priority question. Late to the live stream. What cert are you studying for? Hey, glad you could join me, Christopher. CCIE routing and switching, sir. So I'm working towards the CCIE lab. This is my day 59 of doing straight labs and working towards it. And we'll see when I get to my 100-day mark if I'm ready to take the CCIE lab or not. And if not, that's okay. We'll just do some targeted studying to prepare for that final push. So the OSPF section, the priority statement took me for a loop, and the verify connectivity. So actually, as I was going through the answer key, I also missed one of the virtual links. You can do it. Hey, thanks, man. I appreciate the encouragement. So the virtual links, again, if I try to bring up a whiteboard and walk through a small example, I'm not going to give away the lab in case anyone, I appreciate the follow, in case anyone wants to follow along and do the labs. But let's see, if we have a router here, a router here, and a router here, and we'll call it router 1, 2, and 3. Let's see if I'm thinking about this the right way. I think so. So let's see if I'll use a different color. This is going to be area 0. This is going to be area 1. This is going to be area 2. What I did was, and I'm going to have to try and recall from memory, even though I just looked over the answer key. Obviously, in order for area 2 to exchange routes between these two areas, we need to have a virtual link, right? A router, in order to exchange routes between two non-zero areas, must be connected to area 0. So the way to accomplish that, right, is going to be the virtual link. And I thought that was all I needed to do. That actually did not give me full reachability, full connectivity. What I actually needed to do was that virtual link as well as another virtual link here. And that gave me my full connectivity, which I needed. I remember getting sort of aggravated that the OSPF, that I wasn't getting all of my prefixes in OSPF. Then anyhow, once I read that in the answer key, I went ahead and added this additional virtual link to my topology in my lab, which I still have running. And as soon as I did, I was able to see those additional OSPF prefixes that I was lacking before. So definitely something I want to keep in the front of mind as far as when and where to use the virtual links, right? We typically always use the one virtual link. but this time we needed 2, and it didn't quite make sense to me, but that's what I did, and it fixed my problem. The next section was RIP. I didn't have any problems with RIP, except for the very last bullet point, which I gave myself as 0, because that bullet point was actually referencing something in the following section, which involves redistribution, which I did not get. The next section after that was EIGRP. So I'm going to skip most of the junk here, but I'll say that one of the bullet points, I was very, very, very proud of myself for identifying it, because it was pretty tricky. Router 1 should not send EIGRP updates within EIGRP 20, the Autonomous System 20. Do not use any filtering techniques, right? So you would typically automatically think passive interface, right? Passive interface, and you won't advertise any updates. And it was so funny, because exactly what I remember saying to myself is exactly how the answer key worded it. Well, you might be thinking passive interface, and if you use a passive interface, you won't form a neighbor adjacency, and if you don't form a neighbor adjacency, you can't receive any prefixes. And it was funny that it pulled that out. So the solution to that one was actually something that I haven't done before, certainly not in production. I don't remember doing a lab for, maybe I did a long time ago, but it was EIGRP stub receive only. So there was another option there, EIGRP stub receive only, and that pretty much makes you a passive listener. And I thought that was I did get that because I found that command in the router, and I was like, hey, I wonder what this does. Maybe this will solve my solution or solve my problem. And it did, and that was the correct answer. So so I just happened upon it, and it was exactly what we were looking for. And then one of the more trickier ones was use a minimal number of configuration lines to configure router 1 to accept only the following routes from router 8. So there were 3 prefixes you had to accept, denying all others, and the answer key did it in a single ACL. And I did it in a prefix list with 2 statements. So we sort of had a different approach, and now I know sort of what they were looking for, and I hope that I can apply that same thinking if I get asked a similar question for sort of the minimum number of lines to get something done, to permit or deny something. So I'll try that out. That involves a little bit of craziness with the wildcard bits in a access list. So something similar, if anyone's been through the INE workbook, the CCIE routing and switching INE workbook, there's a couple of good labs about doing some crazy matching with the wildcard bits and the access lists, and that's exactly what this was asking, and I just didn't implement it right. I went erred on the side of prefix lists instead of access lists. The next section was redistribution, and there was a whole bunch of redistribution throughout the topology on this one. I got everything. I did the redistribution correctly. What I didn't get was verify connectivity. I have never gotten my full topology, every IP address to be pingable that we're supposed to. And that is something I have definitely been lacking, and it always comes down to the redistribution. There's always something. One of the things with the redistribution also that, I don't know, maybe I did wrong, maybe I shouldn't have awarded myself some of the points, was, I guess, if we had shut down, the example in the answer key was, if you shut down an interface, you're going to introduce a routing loop. This one specific interface would introduce a routing loop for its for the network. And I didn't see that, and I didn't know it ahead of time. So I'm looking at the topology now and sort of reading the answer key and thinking to myself, just trying to prepare myself for when we do these redistribution, because there is a lot of redistribution in these labs. When we do it, I want to actually, I think the recommendation is to sit back, look at the topology, and already plan out where redistribution needs to happen and exactly what we need to do to prevent loops. And then try to meet the requirements. Because what I've typically been doing is just jumping right into meeting the requirements and finding myself backed into a corner. And I definitely don't want to be backed into a corner when I sit for the CCIE lab. The next section was BGP. BGP was easy peasy, relatively easy peasy. And also, I gave myself a pat on the back for using the correct method specified for one of the bullets here. I'll read the bullet. R4 should have only a single BGP route in its IPv4 routing table. No other BGP routes are allowed on router 4. Do not introduce modifications in the router 4 BGP table to meet this requirement. So originally I did this one as using a table map. And whether I thought that was actually really clever to use a table map, and it did exactly what we were looking for. But I actually backed it out and changed it to the distance command. And that was the exact command that they used in the answer key. So, you know, I've done the INE workbook, most of the INE workbook. I've done INE labs, and you always get a little virtual pat on the back when your answer matches exactly the answer key. It's always sort of a good feeling that, you know, you're on the right track to something. So that one I did get correct, and I felt pretty good about it. The following sections I didn't do so well, mainly because on the day that I did these labs, I labbed for 8 hours and 56 minutes straight, and I was kind of just at the end of my rope. The next one was router maintenance. I got a couple of things wrong on this. Something I hadn't configured before. I got some of the configuration right, which I hadn't done before, so I was happy about that, but ultimately I got one of the bullets wrong, so I gave myself a 0 for that. Also, the NAT one, it doesn't ever explicitly say NAT, but all of the bullet points sort of lead you to the assumption that you need to implement NAT somewhere. My configuration matched exactly the answer key. However, my verification wasn't working, and I couldn't actually send a ping through. So I don't know if that's a bug or something's wrong, but the configuration was there. So I hope that counts. The other was restricting administrative access, telnet on a specific interface. That's no problem. And the rest of them were monitoring network traffic, was setting up an IPSLA and looking for some QoS bits, IP precedence bits rather. I got a 0 for that. I got a 0 for the rest, and as well as the multicast section in the back, I also got a 0. So all in all, I gave myself 47 points. That's 47 out of 76. So not really good. That's not a passing score, but it is. But it was good. It was good to do it. And I have some sections still to work on, which is multicast and some of the other smaller router administrative sections that I'm going to continue to review. I'm done for the night. Guys, when I sit here and I do a lab for 6 hours or 9 hours or however long it takes to do a lab, what you don't realize is it also takes about an hour and a half to grade your exam, which is what I did tonight. I sat here for about an hour and a half, which is why I don't increase the counter on my video for my day tracker, because today isn't a day of labbing. Today is just a day of validation. Tomorrow will be a day of labbing, so I'll increase the counter tomorrow. But yeah, it takes a long time to actually validate your scores. So that's why it's hard to do it at the end of a long lab day, and I'm doing it now. So there we go. For the rest of the week, I'm going to probably be cherry picking some topics that I didn't do so well out of this lab while I still have the lab running, so I can execute it, and then I'll burn the lab down and get ready for a brand new lab coming up this Sunday. I think I'll be trying the CA03, or maybe I'll do 2 troubleshooting labs next Sunday. Okay, so I think that's it. See ya.